Two babies were born on the same day and given to the wrong mothers. For 32 years, no one knew. Then a routine blood test revealed the impossible. The woman's blood type didn't match her parents', and when the DNA results came back, they showed she'd been living in the wrong family her entire life. The hospital was Mercy General in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The date was October 14, 1992. Two women gave birth within 20 minutes of each other. Both delivered healthy baby girls. Both were first-time mothers. Both were exhausted, relieved, and overwhelmed. The first mother was named Karen Walsh. She was 26, a high school English teacher, married to a man named Tom Walsh, a construction foreman. Karen had been in labor for 14 hours. Her daughter was born at 3:42 a.m., weighing 7 pounds, 2 ounces. The nurses cleaned the baby, wrapped her in a pink blanket, and placed a plastic identification bracelet on her tiny wrist. The bracelet read, "Baby Girl Walsh." The second mother was named Lisa Chen. She was 28, a graphic designer, married to David Chen, an accountant. Lisa's labor had been faster, 8 hours. Her daughter was born at 4:01 a.m., weighing 7 pounds, 4 ounces. The nurses followed the same routine: clean, wrap, bracelet. The bracelet read Baby Girl Chen. Both babies were taken to the hospital nursery. Both mothers were wheeled to recovery rooms. Both fathers stood outside the nursery window, staring at their daughters through the glass, tears in their eyes. The night shift nurse was named Paula Hendricks. She was 53, 28 years of experience, normally reliable. But October 14th had been a long night. 3 deliveries, 2 emergencies, and Paula had been on her feet for 11 hours straight. She was tired. She made a mistake. At 4:30 a.m., Paula brought the babies back to their mothers for the first feeding. She picked up the baby in the first bassinet, pink blanket, bracelet, and brought her to room 204, where Karen Walsh was waiting. She picked up the baby in the second bassinet and brought her to room 206, where Lisa Chen was waiting. But Paula had mixed up the bassinets. The baby she gave to Karen wasn't Baby Girl Walsh. It was Baby Girl Chen. And the baby she gave to Lisa wasn't Baby Girl Chen. It was Baby Girl Walsh. The bracelets were correct, but the babies were wrong. No one noticed. Karen looked at the baby in her arms and saw her daughter. She saw Tom's eyes, her own nose. She named her Emma. Lisa looked at her baby and saw her daughter. She saw David's chin, her own hair. She named her Sophie. The families went home 2 days later. Karen and Tom brought Emma to a small house in Wilkinsburg. Lisa and David brought Sophie to an apartment in Shadyside. Both families began their lives as parents, never knowing they were raising someone else's child. 32 years passed. Emma Walsh grew up in Wilkinsburg. She had Tom's broad shoulders and Karen's love of books. She played soccer in high school, studied biology at Penn State, and became a nurse. She married a man named Jason Rivera in 2018. They had a son in 2021. Emma worked at a hospital in Harrisburg and lived a quiet, stable life. Sophie Chen grew up in Shadyside. She had Lisa's artistic sense and David's analytical mind. She studied computer science at Carnegie Mellon, worked as a software engineer in San Francisco for 6 years, then moved back to Pittsburgh in 2020. She never married. She lived alone in a loft downtown and worked remotely for a tech company. In March 2024, Emma scheduled a routine health screening. She was 31, planning to have a second child, and her doctor recommended a full panel: blood work, genetic screening, family history review. Emma filled out the forms, listing her parents' medical histories. Tom had high blood pressure. Karen had asthma. Both sets of grandparents had died of heart disease or cancer. The lab drew Emma's blood on March 12th. Results came back on March 18th. Emma's doctor, a woman named Dr. Rachel Kim, called her that afternoon. "Emma, I need you to come in," Dr. Kim said. There's something we need to discuss." Emma went to the office the next morning. Dr. Kim closed the door and sat down across from her. "Your blood work came back normal," Dr. Kim said. "But there's an issue with your blood type." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Dr. Kim pulled up Emma's chart. "You're type AB negative. That's rare, less than 1% of the population. But here's the problem. Your mother is type O positive. Your father is type A positive. Genetically, it's impossible for two parents with those blood types to have a child who's AB negative." Emma stared at her. "What are you saying?" Dr. Kim hesitated. "I'm saying either your parents' blood types were recorded incorrectly, or there's a genetic anomaly, or what? Or you're not biologically related to one or both of your parents." Emma felt the room tilt. She gripped the armrest of her chair. "That's not possible." Dr. Kim said, "I'd like to run a DNA test, just to confirm." Emma called her mother that night. She didn't tell her about the blood type. She just asked, "Mom, is there anything you need to tell me about when I was born? About Dad?" Karen sounded confused. "What do you mean?" Emma said nothing. "Never mind." She hung up and stared at her phone. Then she scheduled the DNA test. The test was a simple cheek swab. Emma's sample was sent to a lab, along with samples from Karen and Tom. Results would take 2 weeks. Emma didn't sleep well for those 2 weeks. She kept thinking about Dr. Kim's words. Not biologically related. She thought about her childhood, her parents, her family. She looked like them. She acted like them. How could she not be related to them? On April 3rd, Dr. Kim called. "The results are in. Can you come to the office?" Emma went alone. She didn't tell Jason. She didn't tell her parents. She just drove to the office and sat down in the same chair and waited. Dr. Kim didn't waste time. "Emma, the DNA test confirms it. You're not biologically related to Karen or Tom Walsh. There's 0 genetic match." Emma's hands went numb. "How is that possible?" Dr. Kim said, "The most likely explanation is a hospital mix-up. You were born in 1992, correct? At Mercy General." Emma nodded. Dr. Kim said, "Hospital switches were more common before electronic tracking systems. If 2 babies were born close together, and a nurse was tired or distracted, bracelets could be swapped, or babies could be taken to the wrong rooms. It's rare, but it happens." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "So you're saying, I'm not Emma Walsh?" Dr. Kim said gently, "You are Emma Walsh. That's who you've been your entire life. But biologically, you were born to different parents." Emma asked, "Do you know who they are?" Dr. Kim said, "No, but you can request birth records from Mercy General. If another baby was born around the same time, that might give you a lead." Emma left the office and sat in her car for an hour. Then she called her mother. Karen answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetie. Everything okay?" Emma said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." She told her everything. The blood type, the DNA test, the hospital switch. Karen didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "That can't be right." Emma said, "It is right. The test is definitive." Karen's voice cracked. "But you're my daughter." Emma started crying. I know I am." Karen interrupted. "I don't care about biology. You're my daughter. You've always been my daughter." Emma said, "I know. But Mom, there's another family out there. A family that's been missing their daughter for 32 years. And there's another woman, someone who looks like me, who has my DNA, living with a family that isn't hers." Karen was silent. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" Emma said, "I want to find her." Emma contacted Mercy General on April 5th. She spoke to a woman in the records department. She explained the situation. the DNA test, the suspected hospital switch, the birth date. The woman said she'd look into it. 3 days later, the woman called back. She said, "We found one other female birth on October 14th, 1992, within an hour of your birth. The baby's name was Sophie Chen, born at 4:01 a.m. to Lisa and David Chen." Emma's heart pounded. "Do you have contact information?" The woman said, "I can't give you that, privacy laws, but I can reach out to the family and ask if they're willing to be contacted." Emma said, "Please." On April 10th, the woman called again. She said, "I spoke to Sophie Chen. She's willing to meet you." Emma met Sophie on April 15th at a coffee shop in Lawrenceville. Emma arrived early and sat by the window, watching every woman who walked past. At 2 p.m., a woman walked in. Tall, slim, dark hair, glasses. She looked around, saw Emma, and froze. They stared at each other for a long moment. Emma saw herself. Not exactly. Sophie's face was narrower, her eyes darker, but there was something, a familiarity, a recognition. Sophie walked over and sat down. "You're Emma." Emma nodded. "You're Sophie." They ordered coffee and didn't speak for a minute. Then Sophie said, "I got a call from Mercy General 5 days ago. They said there might have been a mix-up when I was born. They said you'd taken a DNA test and it didn't match your parents. They asked if I'd be willing to test too." Emma said, "Did you?" Sophie nodded. "Results came back yesterday. I'm not biologically related to Lisa or David Chen." Emma's breath caught. "So it's true." Sophie said, "I guess so." They sat in silence. Then Emma said, "Do you look like your parents?" Sophie shook her head. "Not really. Lisa and David are both short. I'm 5'9". Lisa has light brown hair. Mine's almost black. David's pale. I tan easily. I always thought I just took after a grandparent or something." Emma said, "Did you ever suspect?" Sophie said, "No, never. I mean, I knew I was adopted or something. No, they're my parents. They raised me. I never questioned it." Emma said, "Do they know you're here?" Sophie said, "Yeah. I told them. They're processing." Emma said, "My parents are too." Sophie leaned forward. "So what now? Do we test to see if we're each other's biological kids?" Emma nodded. "I think we have to." They went to a lab that afternoon. They submitted DNA samples. Sophie's to be compared with Karen and Tom Walsh. Emma's to be compared with Lisa and David Chen. The lab said results would take 10 days. On April 26th, the results came back. Sophie was a genetic match to Karen and Tom Walsh. Emma was a genetic match to Lisa and David Chen. The hospital had switched them at birth. Emma sat in her living room with Jason and stared at the paper. 32 years, she said quietly. 32 years, and no one knew. Jason said, "What are you going to do?" Emma said, "I don't know." She called Sophie. Sophie answered immediately. "Did you get the results?" Emma said, "Yeah." Sophie said, "Me too." They were silent. Then Sophie said, "Do you want to meet them? Lisa and David?" Emma's throat tightened. "Do you want to meet Karen and Tom?" Sophie said, "I don't know. This is so fucking weird." Emma laughed. A broken, shaky sound. "Yeah, it is." They agreed to meet again, this time with their families. Emma told Karen and Tom. Sophie told Lisa and David. They chose a neutral location, a small park in Highland Park. The date was May 3rd, 2024. Emma arrived with Karen, Tom, and Jason. Sophie arrived with Lisa and David. They stood on opposite sides of the parking lot, staring at each other. Karen looked at Sophie. Sophie was tall, broad-shouldered, with Karen's green eyes and Tom's square jaw. Karen started crying. Lisa looked at Emma. Emma was petite, dark-haired, with Lisa's sharp cheekbones and David's narrow nose. Lisa's hand went to her mouth. Tom said quietly, "That's my daughter." David said, "That's mine." The six of them walked to a picnic table and sat down. No one spoke for a long time. Then Karen said, "I don't know what to say." Lisa said, "Neither do I." Sophie looked at Karen. "You're my biological mother." Karen nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And you're my biological daughter." Emma looked at Lisa. "And you're mine." Lisa nodded. Tom said, "How did this happen?" Emma pulled out a folder. She'd requested the hospital records. She laid them on the table. There was a nurse, Paula Hendricks. She was on night shift. She'd been working 11 hours. At 4:30 a.m., she brought the babies back to the mothers for feeding. But she mixed up the bassinets. She gave Sophie to Karen. She gave Emma to Lisa. No one checked the bracelets. David said, "Didn't the hospital have protocols?" Emma said, "They did, but they weren't enforced consistently." This was 1992. Electronic tracking wasn't standard yet. It was all paper bracelets and manual check-ins. One tired nurse, one mistake, and two families got the wrong babies. Sophie said, "Is Paula Hendricks still alive?" Emma said, "I don't know. I haven't looked." Lisa said, "Does it matter?" Sophie said, "I guess not." They sat in silence. Then Jason said, "So what happens now?" Karen said, "I don't know. Emma's my daughter. I raised her. I love her." But she looked at Sophie. "You're my daughter too, biologically. And I've missed 32 years. Lisa said the same thing, looking at Emma. Emma said, "I don't want to lose my family. Karen and Tom are my parents. But I also," she looked at Lisa and David, "I want to know you. I want to understand where I came from." Sophie said same. Tom said, "Then we figure it out together." Over the next 6 months, the two families met regularly. Emma and Sophie had coffee every week. Emma visited Lisa and David's house. Sophie visited Karen and Tom's. They shared photos, stories, memories. They tried to build bridges between two lives that should have been one. But it was hard. Emma looked at Lisa and saw a stranger who was supposed to be her mother. She felt guilty for not feeling more. She felt like she was betraying Karen by trying to connect with Lisa. Sophie felt the same way. She looked at Karen and Tom and saw people she should have grown up with. But she didn't know them. She didn't have their memories. She'd lived a completely different life. In September 2024, Emma and Sophie met for dinner. They sat in a quiet restaurant and talked about how exhausting it all was. "I feel like I'm supposed to feel something," Emma said. "Like I'm supposed to look at Lisa and David and feel this instant connection. But I don't. They're nice, they're kind, but they're not my parents." Sophie said, "I feel the same way. Karen and Tom are lovely, but I didn't grow up with them. I don't have their inside jokes or their traditions. I'm a stranger in their family." Emma said, "Do you ever wish we'd never found out?" Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Sometimes, yeah, because now I'm stuck between two families, and I don't fully belong to either one." Emma said, "Do you think it would have been different if we'd found out when we were kids?" Sophie said, "Maybe, but we didn't. We found out at 32, and now we have to live with it." In November 2024, Emma decided to find Paula Hendricks. She hired a private investigator. The investigator found Paula living in a nursing home in Erie, Pennsylvania. She was 85, suffering from advanced dementia. Emma drove to Erie on November 20th. She walked into the nursing home and asked to see Paula. A nurse led her to a small room. Paula sat in a chair by the window, staring outside. Emma sat down next to her. "Paula?" My name is Emma. I was born at Mercy General in 1992. You were the nurse on duty." Paula didn't respond. Her eyes were distant, unfocused. Emma said, "You made a mistake that night. You switched two babies. You gave me to the wrong family. And for 32 years, I lived with people who weren't my biological parents." Paula blinked slowly. She turned her head and looked at Emma. For a moment, there was a flicker of recognition. Then it was gone. Emma said, "I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you even understand what I'm saying. But I need you to know, it changed everything. It changed my life. It changed Sophie's life. It changed 4 parents who raised the wrong children." Paula's mouth moved. She whispered something. Emma leaned closer. "What?" Paula said, "I'm sorry." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Do you remember?" Paula said. "So tired. So many babies." Emma nodded. "I know." Paula's hand reached out and touched Emma's. "I'm sorry." Emma stayed for another 10 minutes. Then she left. She drove back to Pittsburgh and never saw Paula again. Paula died 3 months later. In January 2025, the two families gathered for Emma's son's 3rd birthday. Karen and Tom were there. Lisa and David were there. Sophie was there. They sang happy birthday. They ate cake. They took photos. Emma looked around the room and saw 2 families, blended and awkward and trying. She saw Karen laughing with Lisa. She saw Tom talking to David. She saw Sophie holding her son. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was something. After the party, Emma and Sophie stood outside on the porch. It was cold. Their breath misted in the air. Sophie said, "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like?" Emma said, "What do you mean?" Sophie said, "If the switch hadn't happened. If I'd grown up as Emma Walsh. If you'd grown up as Sophie Chen." Emma thought about it. "All the time." Sophie said, "Do you think we'd be different people?" Emma said, "Probably. I don't know. Maybe." Sophie said, "I think about it a lot. Like who would I have been if I'd grown up in Wilkinsburg instead of Shadyside? If I'd had different parents, different schools, different friends?" Emma said, "You'd still be you." Sophie shook her head. "I don't think so. I think we're shaped by the people who raise us, by the choices they make for us, when we're too young to choose for ourselves." Emma said, "So you think we're entirely different people than we were supposed to be?" Sophie said, "I think we're the people we became, and maybe that's not who we were supposed to be, but it's who we are." Emma nodded. They stood in silence for a while. Then Sophie said, "Do you regret finding out?" Emma didn't answer right away. She thought about the past year, the confusion, the pain, the guilt, the strange attempt to build relationships with people who were biologically hers, but emotionally strangers. She thought about Karen crying in the hospital parking lot. She thought about Lisa's careful, tentative questions. She thought about her son, who now had twice as many grandparents and no idea how complicated it all was. "No," Emma said finally. "I don't regret it. It's hard. It's messy, but it's the truth. And I'd rather live with a hard truth than an easy lie." Sophie said, "Even if the truth doesn't change anything." Emma said, "It changes everything. It just doesn't fix anything." Sophie smiled. A sad, tired smile. "Yeah, that's about right." They went back inside. The party was winding down. Karen was packing up leftover cake. Lisa was washing dishes. Tom and David were talking about a football game. Emma's son was asleep on the couch. Emma looked at Sophie. "You know what the worst part is?" Sophie said. "What?" Emma said, "I look at my son, and I wonder if he'll ever have to deal with something like this. Some secret, some mistake, some truth that changes everything, and I can't protect him from it." Because life is just full of these moments, these switches, these mix-ups, and you don't know they happened until it's too late. Sophie said, "Do you think Paula Hendricks knew? Do you think she realized what she'd done?" Emma said, "I don't know. Maybe, or maybe she forgot. By the end of her shift, maybe it was just another night for her." Sophie said, "That's the thing that gets me. For us, it's everything, our entire lives. But for her, it was just 11 hours of being tired." Emma said, "Yeah." They stood together, watching the two families, their families, navigate a space that shouldn't exist. A space created by one nurse, one mistake, one night in 1992. And Emma thought about Paula's last words, "So tired, so many babies." She thought about how easy it was to make a mistake, how one moment of exhaustion, one lapse in focus, could ripple forward for 32 years, how two families could be built on the wrong foundation, and no one would know until the cracks showed. She thought about blood types and DNA tests and identity bracelets. She thought about the word mother and how it could mean two completely different people. She thought about Sophie, who was genetically her sister but had lived a separate life. She thought about Karen, who wasn't her biological mother but had been her mom every single day. And she realized there was no good answer, no clean resolution. Just two women, born 20 minutes apart, raised in the wrong families, trying to figure out what family even meant. Sophie put her hand on Emma's shoulder. "You okay?" Emma nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Sophie said, "We're going to be okay." Emma looked at her, this stranger, this sister, this person she should have known her entire life, but only met a year ago, and said, "I think so," eventually. They went inside. The party ended. The families left. Emma put her son to bed. She lay in her own bed and stared at the ceiling. And she wondered, if Paula Hendricks hadn't been tired that night, who would she be? Would she still be Emma Walsh? Would she have married Jason? Would she have the same son? Would she even exist in the way she existed now? The answer was no. A different Emma would have existed. An Emma Chen, raised by Lisa and David, living a different life, making different choices. But that Emma didn't exist. This Emma did. And this Emma had to live with the knowledge that her entire life, every choice, every moment, every relationship, had been built on a mistake. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd call Sophie. They'd have coffee. They'd talk. They'd keep trying to build something from the wreckage of a 32-year-old error. Because what else could they do? The babies had been switched. The lives had been lived. And now all they could do was move forward, carrying the weight of two families, two identities, two versions of who they were supposed to be. And maybe that was enough. Or maybe it wasn't. But it was all they had. If you found out at 32 that you'd been raised by the wrong family, would you want to know your biological parents, or would you rather have never found out?